Hello, everyone. This is the week three wrap up. And because the last discussion board on budgets was there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of going by, a lot of exchanges that I found very, quite frankly, very inspiring. It really got. This is the kind of thing I like to talk about. But I'm concerned that this is going to go on for too long, so I've decided that I'm just going to be talking about this past week, and then I'm going to do a subsequent video probably tomorrow morning about and talk about the following week, I guess the first assignment, I should say. So to start with, one of the things that I realized and I talk about all the time are definitions. It's imperative that everybody understand the terminology and the vocabulary that is being discussed all the time. And it seems, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, it always seems very simple, and that everybody's so rudimentary, nobody needs to talk about it. We all know what we're discussing. But once again, I found out just this past week, I encountered a situation in which data management and the sponsor were not on the same page with what with the terminology in the contract. One thought that the number of subjects included the number of screen fails, while the other, the sponsor, did not. And so this is going to result in a change that's going to have to result in to the contract, and a lot of people are rather irritated about it. But it's not the end of the world. But again, there was not that understanding at the very beginning. So let me start. There was a little bit of that in the exchanges. So two things. We have, as it relates to the budget, there were two kinds of budget. It actually wasn't my intention to be discussing for this week the two different types of budget. I wanted to just discuss actually a site budget. But this was a happy mistake, and because it sort of took took the discussion in two different directions. One was the overall study budget, and the other was the site budget. Now, for the sake of discussion, I want to be sure that everybody understands exactly what the difference is. To begin with, a site is it's an organization, or it's a single organization, or it might be a single institution that is responsible for conducting the research in a single location. Although even that can be variable, and I'll get into that in just a second, for a given protocol. They are selected by the sponsor. The sponsor has the responsibility. Sometimes that is given to the CRO, but ultimately, even if the CRO has the that responsibility of identifying the site and ensuring that they have the qualifications and the ability to recruit and be able to conduct all the procedures and actually follow up with the subject until the treatment period and any follow-up period has concluded. So the enrollment period for that study, as well as the treatment period. The enrollment period being the entire length of the study. Let's say that you've got a study that needs 100 subjects. Ideally, you want a site that can participate for that length of time, and then individually for each individual subject. That's called the treatment period. So the treatment period is obviously significantly shorter than the enrollment period. Now, each site is going to have a site budget, and in that site budget, you're going to have all of the procedures that site is responsible for. They're going to get paid for everything from usually starting for the consenting period, or that task, doing, say, physicals, medical history, and then any procedures. So let's say that they're going to have spirometry, any laboratory that they have to draw blood for. So if they're just obtaining the samples, that's one cost. If they actually have to be conducting the test, so there are a lot of tests that are very simple, that can be done in a doctor's office. So let's say that there are some even as non-complex as, say, drug screens. They could be doing urinalysis. They could be doing, sometimes they can even be doing CBCs and maybe Chem 10, small chemistry panels. They're going to get compensated for all of that. In addition, you're going to be paying for investigator time. You're going to be paying for study coordinator time. And then you're going to be paying a certain percentage of what is described as overhead. That is, so let's say that a visit is $1,000. You may add anywhere from, say, 10% on top of that to cover some small miscellaneous costs that are not going to be individually identified in that budget. All the way up to some institutions, hospitals, large hospitals, and whatnot, can charge overheads as high as I've seen as high as 41%. And that's because there are so many people involved, and in order to, they have to, there's just a whole lot that goes into it, and it's accepted. For a physician, an individual private physician's office, a typical is going to be probably 20-25%. Some are recognizing that if you have very good study coordinators, they're going to be asking for 30%. It's tough for that I've seen. It's tough for a sponsor to swallow 30% and put that and be tacking that on top. Although I've had the opportunity to work on both for a long time on both the sponsor side, but now I've been doing consulting and working with people on the site side, and seeing what kind of real overhead that they are experiencing. And so there are ways to be able to adjust small adjustments. That you're going to have, like I said, individual costs for some of these other tests and a lot of the procedures that are being done. Increase those somewhat, so that way, and then you can bring the overhead down. And there's always ways to be able to try to manipulate the costs. So that's just the site cost. That's just the site budget. Now the overall budget, the sponsor, and the study budget, that one part of that is going to be PI costs. All the rest of it that is going to be associated, if the study is, say, outsourced to a CRO, then you're going to have your outsourcing costs to the CRO. Now, what is outsourced is, and what's going to be on that CRO is going to be on that CRO budget. So let's say to the CRO, if you want just monitoring, then all they're going to do is they're going to give you all the associated costs, the budget for that monitoring. But you very well, that the sponsor may say they may outsource the data management. Now, it may be associated with the CRO. The sponsor may decide they're going to oversee it, and they're going to outsource it to still another party. And so that's not necessarily going to be part of the CRO cost. So that's going to be separate, but it's going to be part of the budget. You may have statistics. Again, it may go to either side. You may have medical monitoring. If there is not a medical monitor in-house and you have to contract one out, that's going to be an additional cost. The costs of you have simpler things like shipping. You're going to have investigator meetings and all kinds of other meetings. If you've got special committees that oversee some of the data as it comes in, if you've got a data safety monitoring board, DSMB, that especially say with phase 2 studies that are looking at the data as it comes in to be sure that there is nothing that from a safety perspective that is unexpected, and they want to be sure that they're looking at it and they go, okay, all the subjects are doing well. There aren't any liver difficulties that they're expecting or seeing. They're not seeing anything else. I was part of a study one time, and there was a DSMB that began to see some problems, and they have the complete ability to pull the plug on the study. That at times that happens. Other times they're looking at the data and they see it at the very end. Obviously they can't stop it, but what they can do is stop it from continuing on to the next phase and having other studies until they're able to identify exactly where the problem lies. So that's part of the overall study budget versus the site budget. So once you figure that out, once you figure out what the costs are, now you have to figure out from a time standpoint. So let's say that you're expecting enrollment to go for, let's say that you're expecting it to go for a year. So remember what I said a few moments ago. You've got two different timelines. You've got the treatment period for the individual subjects, and then you've got the enrollment period. So you've got the individual treatment periods, and then you've got the overall enrollment period that says that this is how long it's going to take for us to get from the first subject that is brought in all the way to the last subject. And once they complete their treatment period, and that's going to be your block for the enrollment period. So once you've made a decision on that, and usually cost is a driving factor for that. But there's all kind. They typically want it done fairly. A sponsor will want it done fairly quickly, but not so fast that it comes in and you're not able to monitor the data as it's coming in. You want to be able to see and monitor the progress of your subjects, and don't wait till the end to then trying to catch up with all of that, because problems that are presenting themselves, it's important that they're recognized in a stepway fashion, rather than trying to figure out after you've got, I don't know, let's say 50 subjects in, and you have this huge bolus of data that suddenly needs to be SDV'd, or source data verified, monitored, and looked at, and you actually are ensuring that the sites are following your good clinical practice, GCPs, and going along as they should. You have to project how much money I'm going to spend, let's say each month, each quarter, and annually. Up to now, still, the literature says that 60% of project managers are still using an Excel spreadsheet. It was funny because I was at the store not a few weeks ago, and I was buying loose leaf paper for one of my daughters, and I came across a pad of graph paper, and I thought, how about that? That looks just like an Excel spreadsheet, except it's, like paper. It is not that much different, quite frankly. Yes, with an Excel spreadsheet, there are lots of things you can do with it. We typically put all of our contact information for all of our sites, and there's a lot of information that can be put in there. You can then reconcile different sites and putting pivot tables and things like this. But for being able to project out how long it should take to enroll a study, and then be able to monitor how much money is actually being spent, it is as rudimentary as a horse and buggy. It is, to me, it's just a terrible way. And I was waiting for somebody. Adam finally, he caught on to that. Said, so how do you go about doing this? If 60% of project managers are still using Excel spreadsheet, isn't that kind of, isn't that difficult? And aren't there better uses of software to be able to do that? And absolutely. There was a couple of other people. Well, Adam's comments jumped out because I was waiting and hoping that somebody would mention that. There was a couple of other people that were definitely going in that direction. But there is a tremendous number of programs that can do that. But as expected, they are expensive. But they are light years from an Excel spreadsheet. Other industries such as GM and GE, their project managers, what they have to do is not all that much different to being able to manage supply and manage money, and the programs that they use are just light years beyond what we use in the pharmaceutical industry. I have had the opportunity to be able to use some of the software, and it makes things so much easier because the algorithms that are developed, it just cannot possibly be put into an Excel spreadsheet. And having to put in, it also reminded me of the very early days of computing, where you had to put in formulas. You weren't writing. The operating systems were nowhere near as easy as they are to use now. You weren't having to do backslashes and writing essentially rudimentary code. So now, at least, and this was a number of years back when a large pharmaceutical company that I worked at I had volunteered and was made to be a super user for this new program that was brought in. And what it did was we were able to put in the number of sites. Well, you put in all of the sites. You put in the countries that they're from. You put in screening rates, screen fail rates. You would put in just all of this information up to and even say holidays, because there are a lot of countries that have holidays that we don't have in the U.S. And so you expect their screening rate to drop, let's say, down to zero for, let's say, a week or 2 weeks. And that was part of the algorithm. That's the kind of information we put in. So you put all of this information in, and then it cranks out and it tells you in moments, this is how long, with the information that you put in, this is how long it's going to take you to enroll this study. So you say, wow, that's past what I expected. So what happens if I add additional sites? And a lot of this information you get from a feasibility study, that each of the sites come in or bring in. And so you're able to play with it, and then you're finally able to say, all right, so this is what I expect. This is the number of sites, this is the number of countries, screen fail rates, and all of that. Looks good. And then what that information does is it's linked in with other software that the sites are putting into, say, the screen, when you're screening subjects, when you're randomizing subjects, and then in real time, you're actually able to see. So you've got these projections, then you're actually able to see what your randomization, screening rates, and whatnot are tracking against your projections. And the same thing happens with the money. So how much money is going out versus how much money that you expect to come in. So along with your screening rate, because that's all money, screenings and randomizations and drug and shipping and all of that translates into money that's going out the door, because that's money that you expected to spend. Is it as much as you anticipated? Is it higher? Is it lower? And then you can make adjustments as you go along. Is your screen fail rate higher than you expected? Is your randomization rate lower than you expected? Is it higher? And then you can make adjustments in the program, so that way it'll project out. Okay, so now this is a change in your final product. This is where you expect it to end. This is how much money you're going to, because you're inevitably going to have to do that. And you can anticipate that and be able to report to upper management exactly what's going on. So unfortunately, very few companies don't utilize that, and the only reason I can think of is financial, and that is extremely disappointing to me. But unfortunately, I see some CROs are actually going in an opposite direction to save sponsors money. I had lunch with a friend of mine who works at a small niche CRO, and he was telling me how they will have small biotechs who come to them and say, I have this amount of money. What can you give me for it? And the only way that they can, say, make these budgets, some of these very, very small budgets, is they have to cut out everything that's electronic. Some of them are even using paper CRFs, which I didn't even know they could still make paper CRFs. It's a joke, obviously, but I had not seen a paper CRF since, I don't know, 2003, 2004, somewhere in there. Occasionally they pop up for reasons with questionnaires and whatnot, but it's not very often. But he says the company that they work for, that the kind of clientele that they attract, you can still use paper CRFs. It's just difficult to work with. Only because, first, they're difficult to design. A lot of sites are not prepared to be completing them. And then, of course, you have nothing electronic. You can't look at anything remotely. And that means that all of the information is on site, and so nothing moves fast. But that's how some of them operate. Now, there's the variances. The variances, obviously, we are trying to move to smaller and smaller variances. 3%, sometimes even 2%, is what some places are asking that their project managers are able to maintain. Just using an Excel spreadsheet is it's extreme. It's not impossible, but it is extremely tedious. And the skill of the project manager to be able to manage their finances has to be significantly higher than somebody who is using a software program that does a lot of the heavy lifting. They use they use the algorithms that I just described, and so it is you don't have individuals whose uh, financial skills are going to result in what looks like a poorly managed study. It's just extremely difficult to do so. Uh, 30, sometimes I've seen, I think on average, and you all have, I'm sure that you all have read the same articles as I have, 16% is not uncommon at the end of the year. And for very small budgets, well, that's not a whole lot of money. But when and so in absolute terms, it won't be that painful. But when you're talking about, I mean, I ran a study a number of years ago that had a total budget of $320 million. Obviously, I wasn't the only one. There were multiple managers on it, and I led a large aspect of it. And so, 16%. Let's see, that wasn't the annual. That was after 4 years. The numbers can get very, very big. And then when you're looking at a very large, a large pharmaceutical company where you've got a whole bunch, you've got dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of studies being run at the same time, and each one of them has multi-million-dollar budgets. Well, 16% of all of that again adds up to a whole lot of money. A whole lot of money that if they are too underspent, then as I said in the discussion board, then that what ends up happening is that you've got a whole lot of money that is left over that could have and should have been utilized to initiate another study, to be part of another study, or could have been used in some other aspect of the business. But instead, it's just bad. It's just poor business. It's just poor business. If you're underspent, then they have to go out and find the money. That's fairly obvious. Uh, I don't want to go on for too long on this. It looks like I'm already at 22 minutes. So I want to put out a little survey and ask if anybody is interested in continuing this discussion, and we can talk about anything related to the course and collaborate live. I've done this. I did this in the past a few semesters ago, and I think after 5 or 6 weeks, I had like one person who called in, and while we had a good discussion, it was just one person. In the meantime, I was sitting there for 5 weeks waiting for somebody to call, and it didn't. When nobody did, it was a little disappointing, but at least it was there. And because you all are so involved and there is a lot of interaction, I'd like to make sure that I am in a position to be able to clarify and fill any knowledge gaps the best I can. And I have to tell you that what made this past week as interesting, truly interesting to me, is that everybody they come from a different place. You work in different institutions. You have different levels of experience, and some of the things that you all brought up of what about SAEs and AEs, and the types of studies that I've done in the past. That wasn't anything that we were at least my bosses were ever crazy about paying for. But you made a very good argument to say, well, you know what? If I've got a complex study, and the moment I started reading that, you absolutely should a site should be compensated for the number of AEs and SAEs, because that's a lot of paperwork. That is a lot that can be very involved. There was another one about the budget calendar, and I was completely perplexed by that. And so I don't want to go into every example, but there were some fantastic examples that I had not experienced. And so, great thing about teaching this course and working with students such as yourselves is that I'm learning as much and getting exposed to all different areas I hadn't in the past. So if anybody is interested in a Collaborate Live, I think let me know. Email me. I'm thinking maybe on Sunday evening. Seems to be when most students are on. say at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think we're Eastern daylight saving time. There's no S on the end of that. And so if you're interested, and even if it's just a few of you, I'm perfectly fine with that. Let me know. Just send me an email. And if you have any other questions, something I didn't cover, because now we're at 25 minutes and it's gone about 20 minutes longer than I'd hoped, then we will, I'm certainly willing to talk with you and be sure that you have an understanding of the topic. Otherwise, I appreciate you. If you were able to sit through this whole thing, I very much appreciate it, and have a good evening.